There's so many possibilities, I suppose.
Well, hey everybody, we haven't decided how we're going to do the intro, so we're going to do it live. First thing I have to talk about is why is it always Navy pilots that see UAPs or unidentified flying or airborne phenomena, and Air Force guys seem to be not as worried about that. But maybe that's just me. What do you think, Rain?
That's a great point. Because I've never heard anyone who's like, dude, I got to tell you about this. I was out in the airspace or I was over Iraq and, this UAP, as they now call it, popped up and was flying around. I have no idea what it was. My theory is that after 9 months on a boat with 5,000 dudes, you just start to see things. That's what I think it is. Although I will say that thing, was it like Joe Rogan? I think Commander Farver, is that how he wrote? Seeing the targeting pod footage of that Tic Tac moving around, if that's a real thing, it's pretty wild. Yeah,
I have my theories. I have a lot of theories about it. I don't know how many I can talk to, but we'll go this way. Do you? Because so they had that Commander Fravor guy on Joe Rogan. Which again, why is it always Navy guys that go on a show with like 11 million people to hear them talk about their UFO conspiracies? But either way. We'll see what everybody thinks. So from some military branch or other than human made, what do you guys think?
I give it to Bender. I mean, I'm not like super well versed with this stuff. Not that anyone is.
Yeah.
but also kind of cynical. I'm like, again, it is only the Navy guys that pop up and do this stuff.
I'm going to go it's military for the sheer fact that like I just imagine they're not telling people the whole truth. That is my expectation.
Yeah, I hope that, you see, we didn't know about the B-2. We didn't know about the F-117. That stuff was essentially designed late 70s, early 80s technology, and it's pretty impressive in my humble opinion. And now, I mean, if you just look at from what we operated when we were in high school, we had a Nokia phone, and then, 2007 pops up, iPhone. It's completely changed the world. I'm thinking that there's smart people buried underground somewhere that fly off, every week, and they're just doing all this work. And I'll jump to, because you guys, I think we mentioned last time, Rush Fulkerson. He was a FATE with us. He was in the 41st, Viper dude, test pilot. And I know he was going to get out of the Air Force as a test pilot. And a job popped up somewhere in the world. And the guy who's doing it, he's like, dude, I can't tell you anything about it other than it's the best job you'll ever have in your entire life. And then Rush went off and disappeared. And then he would respond to text messages like 3 days late or 2 weeks late. Or his wife would be like, hey, he's gone right now. I imagine he was flying some really cool stuff or doing things. So
I would hope so.
I don't know. Technology, there's got to be some really cool toys that are just hidden there that we don't know about.
Yeah. Well, everybody, because I did a terrible intro because we're just kind of getting into it. Obviously, it's Rain Waters from the Afterburn podcast. We've got Vader here from the Kodiak Shack podcast. And Bender as a regular staple in these bro chats. This is volume 3, if you were unaware. And we've got Bender who's being oddly silent here.
I can't talk about that kind of stuff. I've seen the UFOs.
There we
Maybe
go.
have spent some time with them. Just kidding. I
Yeah.
haven't.
Well, I think, maybe Bender joined the Navy. That's what we're experiencing here, because apparently it's only Navy guys doing this.
I think it's a question of sensors. You guys we're Mexican radars. You don't get to see anything.
That's true. We don't even see the adversaries who we're supposed to see in an APG-68. And anybody who's seen the F-22 Raptor demo, which Rain and I watched it at McIntyre when it was doing, you watch that thing maneuver and you're like, that's a UFO. Humans cannot make a machine that maneuvers like that. So I have faith that they can build whatever there is out there.
This does not make sense. Speaking of McIntyre, I was out there with those guys this past weekend. I heard that You interviewed some of them for the Guns Garen Memorial Foundation. I was out there doing a bunch of stuff with them. We hung out on drill weekend. We might or might not have had one of our camera guys get in a little bit of trouble with some of his videoing, but they fixed it. You know, life was good, but it spiced it up a little bit on Sunday.
Well, I want to hear about that. Good. That sounds good.
Yeah, you know how things like
forces.
Yeah, so someone said F in front of mom, but they might have just gotten one angle they weren't supposed to get, but the jet wasn't running. Like life was going to be okay. But I'd slowly watched this thing evolve. So it was like during the launch out there, guys are stepping in the jets. They're getting a bunch of B-roll footage of these guys stepping in the jets. And then you can see the security forces truck roll around. Then the security forces gets out and like talks to him. Then he comes over and talks to me. And it's like, okay, it's going to be good. And the best part of this too, you guys know Mosey. Mosey is like perma top 3 out there. So he's sitting at the desk for those listening and he's kind of managing. Like if there's something happens at the airfield, he relays it to the guys. If there's maintenance issues, he relays between the jets and maintenance. He's the backbone of this operation. But he became the lightning rod for this whole thing too. So he's having to deal with security forces, review footage and all this stuff. It ended up being like a 2-hour ordeal. Again, it worked out, like common sense prevailed, but it was a little bit painful, and then also reminded me of like just the shenanigans that can happen. And you're just like, man, I told the story. So I was like, demo days, right? We would be out there videoing and taking photographs all the time out at Shaw. And the maintenance guys would just call it in. Like I would be the approving authority down there at the demo ramp. I'm sitting at my desk and my back's to the window to the flight line. And I just see flashing blue lights. And like, I look back and they have our public affairs guy in handcuffs on the ground. I'm like, oh man, this is not good. I guess I better go out there. So I go out there and I'm talking to the cops. I'm like, hey, yeah, he's authorized to do this. Like, what's going on? Like, well, sir, no one called in the photo pass and he's out here taking photos. I'm like, we literally do this like 4 times a week, if not 5 times a week. The pass was called in. Like, I'm the approving authority. Can we just like say, whoops, okay, there was like a little miscommunication. We're good to go. Like, no, sir. We got to take him in. So they took him into the station. Like it was, again, like 2 hours he's held there. I'm like, here's what's going to happen. Like, I'm going to call the group commander. Group commander's going to call the security MSG commander and mission support group commander who owns security forces. And it's just going to take up everyone's day. And it's like 5:00 in the afternoon. Can we just move past this? Like, no. So there's a little bit of that this weekend, but yeah, what can you do?
I think McIntyre's a little on edge. They just got upgraded Sabre radars, so now they're like probably really sketching, like, oh man, like people are trying to pull one over on the old mighty Viper jet.
Yeah, there's no way.
It's funny, I understand that like security forces, you don't get to make make like real time decisions. Like there are rules and security forces has to stick by them. This is not a story bagging on security forces. This is a story bagging on the Air Force, just if anybody is unclear.
Yeah, but if you start it that way, it sounds like we're going to bag on security forces.
It's like,
well, I'm bagging on one
all due respect.
Guy. Yeah, exactly. Prepare to be disrespected. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Bender and I, and maybe Rain, you met him, but Compton was one of our buddies in Japan, and he's driving around Japan on a base, obviously. And the speed limit is 40 kilometers an hour. And so you're just cruising around, which I don't math well, but I think it's like 30 miles an hour maybe. Yeah. So it's slow. And apparently Compton rolls through a stop sign. So he gets pulled over. Hey, rules are rules. So the security forces gentleman is like, hey, you rolled through that stop sign. And Compton is like, what stop sign? And he's just like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And so they're like, hey, I got to give you a ticket. So they write Compton a ticket. And Compton is, we'll call him Kurt. So he's pretty direct. He's not the, the kid gloves guy. And he goes, so what am I supposed to do with this? Like, do I have to pay something? And he's like, oh, no, sir. You just have to tell your commander. And he goes, oh, so it's not a real ticket. Like and when he says real ticket, he means like, I don't have to pay anything. Like this is just like a point on my on-base driving record. So him saying that to the security forces gentleman, he gets upset because, now you're like disrespecting the ticket. So that goes from that security forces person all the way up to the group level, over to the ops group, and back down to the squadron. And Compton had to be, I think it was service dress, and effectively apologize for calling it not a real ticket. And I was
they called in that.
I get it.
That security forces officer was like in the room, right? Like standing there waiting for an apology from Compton. Like what the?
Yeah. And again, like I get it. But okay, a guy was a jerk, like just let it go. But I was shocked when I heard that as like a lieutenant, and I was like, what organization am I in? Like this is weird. Like I don't know. It's a Fortune 100 company. It's not a military branch,
Right. I think again, I'm very appreciative what security forces, what they do. Like it's it's a thankless job, but it's very important and you absolutely need them. But there's hearing stories like that. And it's not just like security forces, right? Like if someone got offended like at the finance office, and it's like now it just goes up and over and you're like, just do your job. I'll do my job, and like everyone wins. I'm cynical about that. I feel like Bender might have a story or two like that. I don't know. Maybe Bender, do you have anything like that?
No, I'm pretty clean throughout my career, I think, generally.
I remember like
no one has time for that.
Bender,
so annoying.
Yeah. That's what Bender's like, to the point, and he calls people's BS. That's what I really appreciate about Bender. I think you did that once or twice at Shaw.
Yeah. Some people don't appreciate that though. We had pretty good commanders though. I didn't get in a whole lot of trouble as a general rule, but I wasn't also allowed to talk to some people directly as a general rule either. So
well, yeah, because again, you like called them on their BS, and that's what I appreciated. I think it was like something at the gate. I remember didn't like Shaw, it like went to like single gate ops. Like it just became like ridiculous. And I think you just spoke facts, and then facts hurt someone's feelings. But
yeah, they had like, I can't remember what it was exactly, but it was single. Oh yeah, they put up like 2 or 3 stop signs. You remember that? So you had to stop.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Like 100 yards from the gate, and then you stopped 50 yards from the gate, and then they stopped to check your ID. And so like the line was like 2 miles long, and they'd wait for the one car to come up, and then on the other side they had like Humvees set up with, no kidding, they're like 50 cals and a guy manning it for whatever reason, like on the other side of the gate. So for whatever reason, the threat con had reached some insane level. So it was like the first guy would go up, he'd get his ID checked, he'd go through, they'd wait for him to like make it past the 50 cals or whatever, like, okay, he's safe. And then they'd marshal the guy who's waiting at a stop sign 50 yards away up to the gate, wait till he was in place, and then the next guy would come up. I mean, it took hours to get through that line. It was ridiculous.
That's what I remember. Yeah, because I remember you called it on it. And just going back, like I'm not a tactician when it comes to force protection and gates, but I was like, this is the silliest thing in the world. One, we're stateside, so if you need to put barricades up to like impede traffic flow and slow down someone who might run the gate, like the resources exist. But putting a stop sign up, like, I don't know, if I'm going to run the gate, I'm not going to give heedance to your stop sign, like a concrete barrier wall. Like I have to physically go around. That was so dumb. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, that was shenanigans. There's a lot of bad ideas out there. Just getting processes. We had one guy who he lost his ID. I might have already. I'm not sure if we're sharing the same stories we shared before, but he's a captain, Viper pilot. He loses his ID. He goes to the ID place. He's like, hey, I just need to get a new ID. I lost it. And they're like, well, have you spoken to your first sergeant about it? He's like, I don't have a first sergeant. I'm in the ops group. We don't have a first sergeant. They're like, every group has a first sergeant. He's like, no, I'm pretty sure we don't have one. He's like, you do. Don't come back until you have a MFR signed by your first sergeant. So he comes back to my office or whatever. He's like, I need some MFR signed that says like, I feel bad for losing my ID. I promise not to do it again or whatever, signed by my first sergeant. I was like, that is BS. Like, do you outrank a first sergeant? Like, write your own MFR and put your name on it and give it back to him. So he types up the MFR right there. And he's like, I promise not to lose it again, signed myself, like whatever. And he takes it back to the MPF. And of course, like that just made them so mad. So the sergeant at the desk light can't compute. So he goes and gets his supervisor, who's a civilian, who's been there for 30 years. And the civilian's like, we have processes in place. You will follow our processes. Find your first sergeant. Anyway, it just goes on and on. So he like calls me back. He's like, hey, they're saying they're not going to take this. I'm like, you stand at that desk and you wait until they give you a new ID. So he's like, comes back like an hour later. He's all like, he's pretty excited, but he's like flushed. He's like, I won. We won. Whatever's like, well, what happened? So I guess they like eventually got up to the officer in charge of the MPF, which is a first lieutenant straight out of, like OTS or whatever. And she's like, I don't know what to do. So she signed it for him. And then they gave him the ID. But that civilian was so mad that we had bypassed the process.
I don't get it. It's like the dog ate my homework kind of thing where it's like, oh, you're in trouble now. And it's like, I lost my ID. I don't know. Like that stuff happens. But
yeah, I mean, and then that afternoon he goes and flies a, $25 million jet. So the Air Force can trust you to be able to fly that jet because nobody else can do it except for him. But to get an ID, like that is too much risk. We can't accept that.
It's like the Flightline driver's license program, like I would just get the maintainers to drive me around purely out of spite because I'm not going to do that test. I'm like, yeah, taxi a $30 million jet around this airfield all day long. But you're telling me I can't figure out how to like give way to an aircraft or stay inside these lines. Like, this is dumb. You guys are dumb.
I had a really crappy response. Maybe I should have said it, but I don't think I did. In my memory, I believe I kept it to myself. But I had the same thing. I was like, hey, why do I need a Flightline driver's license? Like, I taxi jets around. And they're like, well, it's different. And in my mind, I was like, how do you know? Like you've never taxied a jet, so how do you know if it's different, driving a car? Which, again, is not a nice thing to say. I hope I didn't say it. But it's one of those things where you're like, I get it. There are processes, we have to follow them, but we also have to use common sense and say like, hey, maybe this doesn't make sense for pilots whose job it is to understand what lines mean what and what lights on the airfield mean what. Like, I get it. But I don't know.
Explain to me what the importance of an ILS critical area is. Yeah, what that little line means. I mean, I don't know what it means, but I know.
I know how to utilize it. Yeah.
Its purpose is to make me nervous for about 30 seconds. I'm like, is that the line I'm not supposed to cross? And then I cross it.
I need to be. Can I go past this? Is this one of those days I can't go past it? What's the rules?
Yeah. Oh man, speaking of just ridiculous like buffoonery type things. So they're moving the markers on the airfield at my last base when I was at Holloman. And before putting the new hold short and instrument hold short line, they paint over them. And luckily, the person who's taxiing out there is the wing commander at the time. And so he's taxiing out like just going to the runway, and he just doesn't see. He just sees like, darker black streaks across the taxiway that used to be instrument hold short and hold short line. So he just like, well, man, I can't find the hold short line. Like, this is crazy. And sure enough, he has a CMAV, like a controlled movement violation, because they've painted over the hold short line and there's no hold short line now because they haven't painted the new hold short. And you're like, this is crazy. Luckily it happened to him because anybody else would have probably just gotten destroyed. But it was like, you better, hey, wing commander. Yeah, stuff happens, so. Yes. Well, speaking of MFRs, Bender, this. So Rain, before you swapped us out in Jordan, we had a guy who was at Misawa with us. I won't say his name because he's probably doing really good things in the Air Force now. He's a fast burner. But he got there 2 months before us. So he's leaving 2 months prior because he was doing like a wing weapons thing on our first deployment. And really great guy. And so we're in Japan. Obviously, Japan, if people, I'm a geography major, so I'm qualified to talk about this. So Jordan, to get back to Japan, it makes sense to fly east. But most everyone else who goes to, like the Middle East, Jordan, all those places, comes from the continental United States or possibly Europe. So the standard process of going back home, quote home, is west. And you must in process through Baltimore because that is where everyone from that side of the world goes back home. So he's like, hey, I understand that there's a process here, but I need to go to Japan. I don't need to go to the United States. And they're like, I'm sorry, sir. Like, you need an MFR stating that you can deviate your travel. So same thing. He like writes this whole MFR and he's like, hey, I'm trying to go to Japan. I can take because he's full up. He's like, this specific flight to take me to this specific country back. And they get the MFR and they're like, no, sorry, we can't accept that. So he literally, because he's better than me, he literally takes the rotator through Baltimore and then has to travel from Baltimore now west again across the United States, across the Pacific, back to Japan, because the process. And you're like, holy moly, this is crazy.
Oh my gosh, that inflicts so much pain.
Yeah, for no real reason.
Yeah, again, these are like just all the shenanigans. Like, there's a million of them, and you listen to like other people, like in the Army and Navy, like everyone has these stories. You're just like, if we could sprinkle common sense. The problem is you get to size of an organization that the bureaucracy is so big, and I don't know if is it CYA? Is that what's happening? Like, no one is willing to like delegate the responsibility down to the lowest level because they're worried about their careers. Like, what is it? That's what I want to know. I don't lose sleep over this, but I'm curious right now.
See, I feel like it's just control. So perfect example, I think it was General Goldfein. Maybe it was the CSAF before him, but it was like, hey, get rid of non-important processes. Like, let's get rid of the extra stuff. Like, let's stop doing these things. And somewhere between him and me as an end user, the processes were still in place. And I think there's just somewhere in between people like, no, I need this. Like, I need this information. I need these things to happen. And they just don't let go. Like, even though their bosses saying it, you as an end user, you can't be like, hey, sorry, sir, but General Goldfein told me, So I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think, Bender?
Yeah, I think it's CYA for sure. So we had, when I was in Afghanistan, we had, so we were obviously Vipers. So we carry some air-to-air missiles and some SDB or whatever other types of bombs. And then the Raptors were somewhere in, were they the deed? I don't even know where, but not the deed, I guess.
Yeah.
They were somewhere over there. But somewhere in the planning process, it was like, hey, Raptors haven't dropped any bombs recently. Like, we want to justify, why they're deployed and all that stuff. So they were like, Vipers, you're going to fight DCA in Afghanistan, which there's not a great air threat, out there in Afghanistan. But load up for DCA because we're going to have the Raptors fly in country to drop some SDB or whatever. We're like, wait, what? We're like, no, yeah, you guys, we have there's potential threat coming from Tajikistan or whatever. I kid you not. So that could happen because the Raptors are coming. So like, load up, you'll be an air-to-air loadout or whatever, and you'll be fine DCA. So we're like, oh, fine. Like, what are the spins? Like, well, we don't have spins for you. Just fly it. Like, well, like, what are we doing? And if something does happen, like, what's our authority to like, stop it or engage or whatever? Like, well, standby will get you that. So like the night of our first DCA vols or whatever, there's still no like spins or authority. They're just like, just use the spins we use wherever in another place. And we're like, what is going on? They're like, don't worry about that. Here, the one rule we do have for you comes from I can't remember I think it was the wing commander's like, the one rule we've put in place is that you won't do yo-yo ops or whatever. So I'm like, it just was so frustrating. Like, they couldn't, no like command decision was made at all. Like, nobody would take on the authority of like developing spins or defining what the threat was or anything like that. The only decision any commander between my squadron and the CFAC or whatever was no yo-yo ops. So a flight lead's decision, like that's like the one decision I am supposed to be able to make. They're like, we don't trust ourselves to make any decision except for your, personal decision, whatever. And that's
and now,
yeah, it's across the Air Force like that. Like the only guidance we ever get is like guidance that at our level, like, we can make. It's the same thing like losing your ID. Like, they'll make those decisions for us, but they don't trust us to make that decision. But all the huge, super important decisions, like, they're not willing to make that, like, or clarify that. No way. It's
right.
too dangerous.
Yeah.
yeah, let me take this off your shoulders, and I'll handle this problem that should be done between a lieutenant and a major. Oh, well. Hey, shift gears here a little bit. How much money would it take for you to sell your soul and train with a near peer threat and teach them Western tactics? I won't name any countries, but there's a news article out there. Apparently some of, our friends are working with a near peer threat, or what we would deem as a near peer threat, teaching tactics.
I would never, but
me neither. Let it stay for the record. I've never thought about it. We were talking about that in the bar last night, actually. We were like, there is a number, right? And everybody's like, oh yeah, I have a number.
It's like $270,000. That seems a little low to go sell.
That's not my number.
Yeah. I was like, oh man.
I have a feeling.
So for those listening, I was like, there's an article out there that there's 30 British pilots approximately that are working with the Chinese, teaching them tactics and things like that. So
yeah,
I think we would all agree, for those listening, that's, I would say, considered selling your soul to sell your bros out. But yeah, sorry, Vader, what were you saying?
Well, yeah, I would say there's going to be fallout. I mean, like legitimate fallout from your home country. So the reality is, like, you have to be independently wealthy. You know what I mean? It'd have to be, I mean, sub $300K a year. Like, that's a lot of money. That's a ton of money. But you may not be able to go back home. You know what I mean? So it's like totally not worth it. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's not even like Snowden money. You know, you got to at least make Snowden money.
Yeah,
You're not going back to the squadron barbecue reunion after that one, I don't think.
Yeah. No, so, not at all.
Yeah, I mean, again, 300,000 is not a small, I guess, lump of change. But if you're never going to be able to go home, or you're gonna live on an island by yourself for quite a long time, it's kind of crazy. But that stuff happens all the time.
Yeah, I am assuming this is a broad assumption. I'm assuming they're like the dirtbag dudes, the dudes in the squadron that the bros don't like anyway. And then they're like, fine, I don't care. I'm going to go teach China then.
Yeah, I could think of a couple people that might do something like that.
Yeah, go do that for sure. I wonder, one, because I mean, maybe those dudes got burned by their military, or just burned by their government, etc. So they might not care at all. The other piece, I'll say, maybe I'll give like a benefit of doubt. Like, so it's run through a shell company in South Africa. Like, depending on how they interface, like it could potentially be like, I don't know, are they flying in South Africa or flying, in the Middle East? There are a lot of expats that go to South Africa or go to Dubai, etc. So maybe they've been giving up this information, like thinking they're training, the South Africans. I don't know. But at some point, like, you got to be smart enough to at least realize that maybe this is nefarious.
Yeah, the one other thing that I saw recently, somebody sent me the YouTube video of the Chinese ACM, the air combat maneuvering. ACM. Yeah. But they use English, so they like do ACM in English, and they're like using all the same terminology that you would hear in like a U.S. engagement, and you're like, that's pretty interesting.
Well, I mean, you saw they bought the Chinese bought a bunch of land. Was it next to, what's a base up in North Dakota?
Minot?
They bought like 150 acres. And I mean, I remember they would go up and down the eastern seaboard. I mean, they do it everywhere. I mean, everyone does it, right? They're out there observing tactics and how things are done. I think the latest thing, it was Grand Forks, North Dakota. But someone's going to like lose their mind over that. But a Chinese company ended up buying, 100 plus acres right next to an Air Force base, which we operate a lot of drones out of. And so, I mean, it's everything flows back to the party and the government. So that'll undoubtedly be utilized as a resource to gather information, etc. So I think a lot of people realize that, especially in the last like 2 years, they see what our dependency was or what our dependency is on other nations, and then also see maybe some of the reality of how certain nations act and behave, not only towards their people or towards everyone else.
Yeah.
Again, I have to go there, so I have to be careful.
Yeah, legitimately. That's true.
Yeah.
Well, I know one thing, that now that I'm getting through the F-15C TX, I think China's shaking in their boots because I'm getting pretty lethal in this airplane. So
just hammering away.
Oh yeah. So far all my experience is in the simulator. So big caveat there. First flight is coming up in a couple weeks. It is wildly different. I mean, aggressively different than the F-16. So for everybody out there who doesn't know, so the F-16 is what's called AOA limited, so angle of attack limited, to the point where you can pull back on the flight controls and the jet will limit the output to stop you from putting yourself out of control or overshooting the available angle of attack, or AOA. The F-15C does not do that. It has like hydraulics. I should probably know this, but it's like cables and hydraulics, I think. And but either way, it has like a small flight control computer doing like very minimal inputs. So you kind of have like, hey, your rudders will deflect 15 degrees without the flight control computer, and they'll deflect 30 degrees with it. So if your flight control computer kicks offline, you don't have as much maneuverability. So you want the flight control computer, especially if you're going to go like really fast, because pilot-induced oscillations can get bad, so that it helps with stuff like that. So Rain, I'll ask you, because Bender, he's a 35 guy now, so he's all about AOA and rudders and everything. So as an F-16 dude, when you think about flying like an AOA, like, oh, I can do AOA excursions and I can bleed energy, what do you expect when they say like, hey, yeah, step on the rudders and you'll do the thing? When you're in the jet, or you imagine being in a dogfight and you see an adversary like fly across your left side at like 2,000 feet, what are you going to do with those flight controls, or what are you attempting?
Well, I'm going to try to get behind them and shoot them and kill them, get them in a Wes, right?
Yeah.
But not having, or being AOA limited, like I never thought about it in the Viper. I'm just like, I'm going to do this. Like you just pull as hard as you can to try and get there, and you don't have to think about it. I would imagine now you're thinking a lot. You have to be, I don't know, I'm not a very good pilot, but like you gotta be a champion not to like over G or not to like, put the jet out of control. Cause like fangs are through the floor as you hit the merge there, and you just want to kill that person. I don't know. That'd be really challenging, I think. Well, I don't want to give Eagle guys too much credit, but
they tell me to my face, and it doesn't even hurt my feelings. They're like, you actually have to like be a pilot and fly this plane. And I'm like, ugh, that's the worst. So I'm like fighting in the sim. I'm merging with an adversary, and we're slower speeds now. So it's like the second merge. So for anybody who doesn't know, a merge could be 180 degrees, kind of passing north-south on a highway. You could kind of be 90 degrees out. Merges are, they can be varied. But either way, I'm slow. So I'm like, oh, I'm slow. I can't over G. So less than like, call it 350-ish, a little higher than that. You can just like pull the control straight to the C-pan and you won't over G. And so I was like, this is sick. I'm just going to like stop the jet. And so C-pan, and I just like, and when I say stomp, I mean stomp on the left rudder pedal, because this jet is just going to like whip around, and I'm going to be pointing at him, and I'm just going to be ready to kill. So it's
like a Raptor.
That's right. And I go seat pan. That's what we call it. We guys. And seat pan. And then I stomp on the left rudder pedal, and the jet rips off to the right. I mean, like total departure. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is insane. So, apparently in the C model, there's two things. There's out of control and a full departure. Out of control just means the jet's not doing what you want. So if I pull back and move, like put the left rudder, and the nose doesn't go anywhere, I am just out of control. Just ease off the back stick, and the jet will probably get back in control and fly. A departure is the jet starts doing stuff that you don't want it to do. So like right there, left rudder, I'm trying to go left, and the nose just like rips off to the right, and I get into this like excessive roll, and I was like, this is going to be a challenge. Like this is not like a one day I'll figure this out. So definitely negative transfer.
So then did he roll in behind you and
I
kill
can
you?
completely see that.
Well, luckily it was like a simulator. Yeah. Luckily it was like a simulator generated thing. So he's just like cruising along. So I'm able to turn back around and go kill him. But yeah, there's a lot.
I heard one of our vice wing commander, he's in reservists when you get up to, hopefully he doesn't listen to this, but you get pretty old in the reserves when you start to get to that level. So he's been around a while. Real young looking guy. He looks great. He's pretty old. Anyway, so he's been flying Vipers since they were, the A model probably. But he was talking about he was a Homestead reservist. So they were there when the F-22 was getting its final, like, what do you call it? When they, whatever. Its final,
IOC?
like, what is it?
IOC?
Yeah, IOC. So the final, like, combat checkouts for the F-22, I guess they brought some in it was at Nellis, and they had, like, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, I think it was Jumper at that time, like, the Secretary of Defense. They were all there for this, like, last vol of the F-22's, like, final combat checkout or whatever. So they had 8 aggressors and 8 of these Homestead jets, and he's one of the Homestead guys, and he said he was just like, it was like a 2 week straight of just like driving and dying and never seeing anybody. But on the last day, he was like up at 37,000 feet, just like cruising, and he sees above him this Raptor go, like point straight at him and goes through the cons. So he sees the flash and then he sees the cons, and so he's like, oh yeah, I finally see one. And so he's like 1.3 or something. So he's like, I got the energy for this. So he just like pulls straight up at the Raptor, like to get his nose on him or whatever. And then, of course, like over commands this 2-bag Viper up at 40-something thousand feet. And so right as they merge, he goes out of control and the jet starts like falling out of the sky. But it starts falling out of the sky. I want to use my hands, but since we're on a podcast, I can't. But basically his nose starts to spin or whatever, and his nose just tracks this Raptor as it's trying to merge with him. So it looks like he's just like, I'm in a gun whiz pretty much, like right now, as he's like just falling out of the sky, not able to do anything. And eventually another Raptor kills him or whatever, and then he recovers like at 20-something thousand feet. And so he like lands and he's like, gosh, I hope, standard, he's like, I hope nobody noticed that happened, and I'm not gonna say anything, obviously. But when they go to the debrief, everybody walks in, and then the like lead test guy is like, you follow me. And he's like, oh gosh, here we go. So he goes into this back room, and it's like a teleconference, and General Jumper is there, and the lead F-22 like engineers, all those guys are there, and they're like, what happened? And he's like, what do you mean? We just merged up at whatever, 40,000 feet. He's like, how did you gun a Raptor at 40,000 feet? Like, what were you doing? He was like, I was just like, we just merged. I just turned across his tail or whatever. Just, whatever, just doing my pilot stuff. And they're like, stop it. Like, tell us what happened. He's like, fine. I went out of control. And they're like, they try to like understand. They were just like sense. Terrified. All of a sudden, this Viper just creamed, this F-22 up at that altitude or whatever. So they're like, oh, no big deal. So Jumper like turns the VTC off. He's like, let's go. And they all like just leave him sitting there. He's like, okay, cool. I guess I'm off the hook.
Yeah, just delay your caps, the critical action procedures for the recovery there. Get your gun shot. Yeah. And then you got plenty of altitude to recover. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Oh, that's great. I like how they didn't care at all that he was out of control and there was no knock it off or anything. It was like, oh, so you didn't accidentally kill a Raptor? Cool, you're good.
Yeah, good to go.
Nobody cares anymore. Oh, man.
We did a combat hammer. This is like 2015. No, I'm sorry. Checkered flag, where you go shoot missiles, and then in the afternoon do that. Hammer was out at Hill, but I was thinking, so we did, like a week. It was awesome. Shoot missiles like in the morning or the afternoon, depended, but you do a huge large force exercise. The Raptors 35, Eagles from Eglin, and we were over at Tyndall doing this at the time. But I remember we were just red air like multiple days in a row, and then finally it's like, hey, we need like a blue air look. And so naturally the Raptors were red air, and you're like, well, this is pointless. I think I went out with gigawatts as a mission check for me, and you're just like, I don't know, I'll get a valid shot when I do my fence in check or something. Like this is like completely pointless. So you can like run the timeline in your head. You're like, I'm probably getting shot in the face right now. Yep, I'm getting shot in the face. Cool. Hey, thanks.
It's just crazy. But Bender, you guys, I mean, again, a fourth gen fighter. I mean, even fourth gen with like an electronically scanned array radar is going to be a little bit better. But I mean, it's not going to hang. That's not our standard threat. Bender, I assume
they talk about the I believe button in the F-35, like during the TX. They're like, obviously we complain all the time about the F-35. It's just our, it's the right of the TX into the Fat Amy. But they're like, one day you're going to be out there and, you're going to be making fun of whatever. And then all of a sudden you're going to see it. And you're going to be like, I believe, like, this is awesome. And so that happened in my first red flag. And it was Raptor flying red air. And like, we pick them up pretty far. We like shoot them. And I'm like, oh gosh, here we go. As I trespass all my numbers, standard red flag. I'm like, they're going to shoot me. I'm going to die in this debrief. But in the debrief, it was awesome. We killed them and they never even had a clue we were there. I'm like, okay, if we go to war, like, this is the machine I probably want to be in. It's pretty money.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Well, and I think if you do your job right, like in 5th gen, if you do the things and you put your jet where you want it to be, like, it seems impressive, outside looking in. It's, you don't, we were talking to Blitz Ayers and we were talking about like managing risk and things. And he's like, yeah, when you're young, when you're a lieutenant, a young captain, it's like, hey, you want to take some risk? And it's like, cool. How much you got? You're just like, you're happy to kind of onboard risk. And then you go to red flags and then you see just how many airplanes are flying around and how close everyone is. And you're like, this is mildly harrowing. Like, this is wild, especially in like a 4th gen fighter, or now where Link 16 is not on a lot of platforms. So now you're just like, you don't have any sort of Link 16 information of who's around you. And you're just like, think small for 90 minutes. Woof.
Yeah, especially if you do one of those red flags, it's like a coalition one, and you have all these different nations playing around. You're like, you get these small altitude blocks, say small, you're like 2,000 feet, and you're used to having like 10,000 feet for your formation. You go out there nighttime, and they're not used to doing a whole lot of night, or even like, it's not think skinny. I'm just hoping someone's not screaming through my altitude block at 450 knots. And I do remember, like, one of ours, we had, he was the chief of OGV prior to Bender, very experienced dude, great dude. And he came back, he got spatial D'd in one of the vols. He was like 12,000 feet out of his altitude block. He hit the pars button, so the jet automatically recovered, which thank God that existed. But, in the debrief, they're like, hey, you're out of your altitude block. What are you doing? He's like, I was spatial D'd. And everyone's like, oh, like, if it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. But again, think skinny, because someone go blitzing through your altitude block. It's amazing. More crap doesn't happen.
Yeah. And even, well, as Block 50 guys, we have these seed caps that are, it's crazy. In F-35, we just don't fly that close together. Which is kind of nice. But in the Block 50, you'd have that mini block, 2,000 feet for 4 of you, and you would have, 2 elements on the opposite sides of these seed caps in the middle of the night. So the closest calls I ever had were, like crossing paths with wingmen in your seed caps, Because we'd have like a 500-foot mini altitude, like, block between the 2 elements or whatever. And you're just like passing 500 feet away from another, like
500 feet. Yeah, doing 400 knots. Like, that's not a lot of altitude. And then you're like in VGs with no depth perception, all the different stars, cultural lighting, etc. Like, trying to figure out, like, is that another plane, or is that a star, or, a tower, or what is that down there? Not a good spot.
Yeah, I'd say one of my least favorite red flag sorties, because Bender and I we went to a few red flags when we were in Alaska, and they were awesome. Just a rage fest. I think there's slightly less aircraft than like a Nellis flag, but it just seems like there's a lot more space. You can move around a little bit more. And then I went to like a Nellis red flag, and I was like, this is intense. And so it's an IMC vol, so instrument meteorological conditions. So we take off, 4 of us take off. And about the time we hit the holds, we go into the weather. And the assumption is like, we're going to be in the weather all day. So we split up. So there's 2 of us. I'm number 3. My number 4 is my DO at the time when I was at McIntyre. And, we're in the weather, just fighting. And I'm like trying to do the job. There's surface threats that are radiating and shooting at you. So you're trying to defend, but stay relatively level. And then there's an aggressor that I see that I'm trying to figure out if he's alive, if he is a bad guy, if he is a good guy. And then I realize he is below halfway down the scope on a 20 scope. And I was like, oh, we are like merging. Like he's less than 10 miles away from me. So this is happening. And if for an F-16, they have 2 radios. So not a ton of radios when there's like 5 different frequencies you could be on. So most of the time, Block 50 F-16s are over probably the escort freak or the strike freak. And then their secondary radio is not to like talk to your flight. It's to talk to the seed roulette people, because you kill the radio at red flag. So you have to tell the seed RTOs or range training officers what you're shooting at, so they know what SAMs to kill or not kill. So you can't really talk just to your flight. So while we're doing this, my DO has a complete MMC failure, which is your mission computer. So effectively, it's like he has an operating motor, flight controls, and engine. He has no navigation. He has no screens. And so this happens. So literally I'm pointing towards the threats, and he is pointing back in trail of me. And he just goes on the RTO frequency. So the range training officer frequency. And he goes, I lost everything. I've got nothing. He's like, I'm going to say it. And he's a prior Navy dude, tons of experience. I mean, he flew the F-14, F-18, then the F-16, all of us are IPs. And he goes, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it. And he goes on, this is all on the aux freak, the secondary freak. And he goes on the pri radio, which everyone is fighting on. We're on the escort freak this time. And so the words knock it off are like, should be sacred. And you say knock it off and the fight's over. And so he goes, knock it off, knock it off. Iron 4-4 is knocking it off. And that's like a direct quote. And like, if you could be unsure, if you hear like, knock it off, you're like, did somebody say something? I didn't hear, but it is like very clear. Like Iron 4-4 is knocking this fight off. And there's like this pregnant pause. And an RTO on the air-to-air side yells negative. And then everybody starts calling their missile shots and the fight just picks back up. So now IMC rules, you're supposed to do like, hey, so many degrees of bank, so many degrees of pitch, but he has no MMC. He has nothing. So I go max AB and I just like limiter pull around the corner to put him within my radar field of view before he falls off the link. So I lock him up and tell me if I've already told this story here, but so I lock him up and right as his Link 16 PPLI disappears. And so I'm like, all right, 4, I'm locked to you. And he's worried about going. So we're just south of the Reveilles. So if you go farther south, obviously that's not great. So he keeps listing, what is that? That's north. So he keeps listing like towards the Reveilles. And I'm like, you're going to punch out of the airspace. Like you're going to fly out of the airspace. Stop going left. And he's like, no, I don't want to go right. Like, I don't want to run into the other thing. So I'm like max AB, just chasing him down through the airspace in the weather. And then I get to like a mile and trail and there's just a sucker hole in the clouds. And I'm like visual. And I like rejoin on him, like fly in there to close formation. And I'm like, all right, I'm on your right wing, like call visual. I'm like, all right, route. And as we start a right-hand turn where that little triangle cutout is for the tanker track, and that kind of northeast side of the airspace. So we're like edging, like I don't want to fly into the tanker track. And I roll out pointing roughly south. And I realize we are on the Marshall limit line for Vol 3. And I look at the clock and we're on push time. Like I literally watch the clock like roll to zeros for the new push time. And I just see this like sea of like Link 16 tracks start pushing across like towards us. And luckily, you guys know him, Flash McVeigh, is in one of the other F-16s. I think he was Nitro Flight. And in the weather, he's just like in place 90 right. Like he just like, nope, we're not pushing. We're done. So we're co-altitude because we're supposed to leave as he shows up. So we're all sharing the same piece of sky, and we fly perpendicular to the push at Nitro's altitude. And I literally see like sharks in the ocean, just strike eagles flying under us, just like little blips of them through the clouds. And we obviously make it back home, but I was furious. Like I could not be more mad at whoever it was that called that. And the debrief was pretty long that night, not surprisingly. We made it back.
Yeah.
What did they say about the knock it off? Negative. Like you can't override that. It's, again, saying F in front of mom. You can't take it back.
You can't triple stamp a double stamp. Yeah. So so this was the thing that really pissed people off. So we get back in, and like the standard thing is like you show up, and first thing you do is talk about the admin. You know, like, hey, any questions from the brief, you know, like, hey, let's talk about getting there or coming back. And then they're like, obviously we're going to talk about the thing. And they're like, yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit. You know, obviously that's a big deal. So we don't want to like not spend time on it. And then we get to the shop val, and it's like weird. So the shop validation is where you like, everybody sits down and pairs all the missiles they took and sees what the truth data is. And then the shop validation's over, and then they go, all right, ready, you're cleared off. And one of the patches in the room, I don't know him really well. He's an awesome dude, but I won't use his name here. He stands up and he like points to literally every part of the like red air, and he goes, sit down, we're not done. And I was like, sick. And that's when we get into it. But they were literally going to let like all of red air and like half of the fight leave before talking about this negative. And then we get a little obfuscation, and we get a little like, well, you know, people were unsure, blah, blah, blah. So we never actually find out who said it. But either way, it was suboptimal. And we get to the bottom of it, how you can't turn off a knock it off. And the worst part was it was because the third push was going to lose out on training if we knocked off the fight. And I was like, I'm so furious because, you know, if we run jets together, if a guy crashes, like, oh yeah, that's going to hold up, you know, like people are going to be like, oh, you're right. I can't imagine why you would lose the third push's training. So just ridiculous.
Yeah. That story spread pretty quickly. I think like that same night we were getting texts about it and stuff. And I think the Tigers were like, we're never going back to red flag until because the commander of red flag, I think, acted unprofessionally is my understanding. Or I guess I'll tell a story from what I heard from him, but I get he would give out green chips for superior performer and red chips for the kind of the lymphax of the bull. And so my understanding is that he gave a green chip. I don't even know who he gave it to, probably C2 or somebody who was useless, but he wanted to make feel better about their lives. And then throws the red chip at, wasn't it your flight lead or something? Or maybe it was at the Tigers or somebody. He was like, no. And you guys need to do better about like understanding when you should call knock it off or whatever. And the story is that he like throws the red chip at the guy, and the guy just stares at him and it just hits him in the chest and just lets it fall to the floor. He's just like, F you, like we're not coming back to red flag again until he's gone.
Yeah, so it was almost exactly that. Yeah, so the number one, the flight lead, was the squadron commander. So number one was the squadron commander. Number 4 was the DO who it happened to. And he's like, hey, number 1, he throws him like the bad chip, like you screwed up chip. And he's like, you got to control your flight, you know, like that's on you. If someone knocks off your knock it off, you got to knock it back off again. And he throws a chip and he like holds up a binder. Because I was flabbergasted that he just overhand throws chips to the like last row. It's like a 40-yard throw to the back of the room. Yeah. And anybody who's held poker chips, you're like, that's dangerous. So he literally holds up like his like Bob binder, you know, he holds it up and it hits the binder and falls to the floor. And like somebody in the row in front of him like picks it up. He's like, here you go, sir. And he's like, don't give me that. Like, drop it on the ground. And yeah, McIntyre left. They were like, we're done here. And they just went home. They didn't, it was like a Wednesday or something. And they were like, Thursday, we're getting ready to go home and we're just leaving. Like, they're not. So yeah, they were rightfully so furious.
Wow. Was that, man, I'm trying to think. Did we do a red flag together when you were at McIntyre? Or it might have been. I did one with McIntyre.
Yeah.
It had been like 2015 or 16.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't get there yet. I wasn't out there until late 16. But yeah, that would have been before, but
man, I was going to tell my story, red flag, my worst story, but it doesn't even compare. It's when I lost my lip light and then we were like switched to runway 3 operations.
Oh, man. Hey,
which was a significant emotional event. I'm like, my lip light died on departure. I'm like, I might abort this sortie and head back. And then it switched to runway 3 recovery when it wasn't supposed to.
Oh,
like, this is terrible.
Runway 3. I was like, please no. If it's runway 3, just let me land opposite direction. I personally accept a 20 knot tailwind for a runway 2-1. Oh man.
Red flag is it's a great, just so much crap happens at red flag. It's awesome. Good stories.
Yeah.
We had one guy who took off and didn't lift, his first red flag. So he just got FMQT and we're like the first jets on this giant departure and he forgets to like raise his gear. So, and then he overspeeds the crap out of it. Anyway, so he's like, I can't catch up in the rejoin. And they're like, your gear's down, so that's your problem. So that happens again, the first jet of the entire go. So he slows down to like 200 knots. So this entire train that starts towards the airspace is like let out by this guy who's now like creeping back at 200 knots. And all the other formations of fighters are just like getting like just crushed up against it. So they're like starting to vector people off the departure to try to get them around. I won't say his name either, but actually I probably will. But we ended up naming him obviously at that red flag, and so switch your jackets. Sorry, I'm in a softball tournament. Here you go. Say hi. You're on a podcast.
Hey.
What? Hold on, I'll be right there. Anyway, so his name is pretty funny because they ended up naming him Limbo for like how low can the bar go, like just always trying to go as low as you can go. I was like, that is a good name. I love it.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, that's brutal.
He's a great dude, though.
We had one of those. We had yeah, they always are. They still are.
Yeah.
We had a departure, and this was actually it. I would say this red flag. We came back from our deployment, and this new commander, you probably can accredit him with, I don't know, maybe at least 20 people getting out of the Air Force, but this was it. This is where it kicked off. We had a young wingman who did the same thing. First go, his first red flag. He left the gear down on departure. And it happens, right? And then he ended up getting dinged, rightfully or wrongfully, but it was something like it kind of changed the course of the squadron. I feel like in most fighter squadrons, like you're going to mess something up at some point. Like metal's going to get bent, but like so long as like no one dies and it's not malicious, it's usually like, hey, you're going to you might be grounded for a week and you're doing like ground duty. You're going to stand in front of the squadron on Friday and tell everyone what you did so people can learn from it. But like, there's nothing permanent on your record, like busting him on a check ride. And he got busted. And that was kind of like the turning point. We're like, oh, I guess we see how it's going to be. Because the heavy community, like they're pretty Q2 and Q3 happy. I mentioned on other podcasts, but like if you, like a Q1 is a check ride pass, Q2, you might have to clean up some items. It's still like not great. And a Q3 means you fail. You're not qualified. And commanders can hand those out at any point if they deem necessary. And that's what happened in the scenario. And for us, like, it was like, ooh, that's something new in the fighter world. You're like, so it only got worse from there.
That's when I showed up at the squadron, when it had reached the worse from there.
Yeah.
Like, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to go be in range squadron. Like, it's totally awesome. The gamblers are great. I get in and it's like, what is wrong with this place? No. like people would like get done flying, they come out of debrief and they would just like freaking leave the building, like no talking, no fun. Like, it's hard to like wreck a fighter squadron's morale, but that squadron had zero of it when I
he wrecked it really quick because Vader, I mentioned, Blitz is going to be on the Kodiak Shack. I've had Blitz was my boss when we were when we were downrange and ripped you guys out, Blitz was awesome. And, we're downrange like, oh, this guy's going to be great, because we're leading up to his change of command. And then talking to some of the other guys and like the Tigers or the shooters had flown with him when he was not a commander, like, oh yeah, he's great. You guys, he's awesome. And he was anything but awesome, which you're not always going to have like good bosses, and you have to figure out what they need. But it goes back to like, in my opinion, he was purely CYA. He viewed being a squadron commander as only a hurdle to his upward mobility, because if anything bad happens in your squadron as the squadron commander, whether it's your fault or not, like you get blamed, or it's going to impact your next assignment, your stratification, if you're going to go to school, yada, yada, yada. He knew that, and everything he did was based upon that, in my opinion.
It's unfortunate. It's almost like some sick joke that it's like you almost never find two squadron commanders that are good in a row. It's normally like touchdown of a squadron commander, and then it's like it's almost like they know, hey, we got to put this guy somewhere, at least put him in a squadron that just had a good commander, and then hopefully after that you get a good commander again, which it sounds like that did happen for the 77th after him, that it kind of rebounded with the next commander. But yeah, it's disheartening to see just how bad a bad commander can be for a squadron.
Yeah, just one guy. I saw so at that time Hyper Anderley was the Tiger commander, which was kind of entertaining, but now I see he's like the wing commander out there. I saw him in the news, Bender.
Oh yeah. He's awesome. Yeah, I think I love Hyper. I'm pretty sure all the bros do up the hill. Yeah, he's a good dude. We just had a jet crash a couple days ago, which is obviously that's a huge deal. I think it's the first Air Force F-35 crash. I think I could be wrong, but anyway, it's a big deal. So we had a pilot meeting yesterday, kind of about it with him talking. Anyway, he's just there's just something, he's not like a weapons school grad or like a lineage, like in the Air Force. There's a pretty standard way of becoming a squadron commander. You guys are familiar with your like quick to IP, quick to weapons school. You go back and teach a weapons school as fast as possible. And those are the guys that usually end up being squadron commanders, and a lot of them are great. But those aren't necessarily, they don't always make the best commanders. Anyways, Hyper is not one of those, right? He was a fate. And then just a really good dude. But he's just a great leader. And some of my favorite squadron commanders are, sorry, somebody got a hit, and this is for a softball, so they're going to scream for a while. Anyway, so
it's like my son's baseball game.
Yeah. But like Fokker, Busey, I know we don't generally throw names out there, but Fokker Busey's awesome commander, doesn't have that kind of lineage, but it's just about like understanding. I think the best commanders, they get, they understand the purpose of the squadron, and then they're just willing to take the risk to make sure that the mission happens and the dudes are taken care of. And you can always sniff out the ones who are dedicated to that, and then the ones who are a lot more gun shy about that.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, guys, I hate to kill the party, but I got to get going. I got a simulator in a bit, so gotta get to work. But hey, thanks for spending the time, guys. We appreciate I always appreciate you guys hanging out and chatting. We're gonna have to do this again, because once I hit the flight line, there's gonna be more buffoonery. So
yeah, it's gonna be dedicated podcast to listen to what happened to Vader that week.
Yeah. All right. Well, you guys have a good one. Have a good weekend, and I'll talk to you guys later.
All right.
Awesome. See you guys.